When Celeste's husband died, his family dragged her deep into the Montana wilderness, beat her unconscious, and left her for the wolves. But death had other plans, and so did the Crow warrior who found her broken body beneath the dying cottonwood tree. The autumn of 1873 had painted the Montana territory in shades of gold and crimson, but Celeste Beaumont felt only the cold bite of approaching winter in her bones. She stood at the kitchen window of the Callahan ranch house, watching her husband Thomas split firewood in the yard below. His movements were labored, each swing of the axe followed by a coughing fit that sent specks blood onto the woodpile. The consumption was winning its war against his lungs, and they both knew it. Celeste had married Thomas 3 years ago in a hastily arranged ceremony that had more to do with her father's gambling debts than any grand romance.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Henry Beaumont had owed the Callahan family money he could never repay, and Thomas 10 years her senior and desperately lonely on his family's remote cattle ranch had offered to cancel the debt in exchange for Celeste's hand. She was 18 then, golden-haired and fierce-spirited, with dreams of opening a dress shop in Denver. Those dreams had died the day she said her vows. The Callahan ranch sat in a valley 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by endless grassland that stretched to the snow-capped peaks of the Crazy Mountains. It was beautiful in its vastness, but that beauty felt like a prison to Celeste. The ranch was run by Thomas's elder brother, Jeremiah Callahan, a hard man with cold gray eyes and a temper that flared like summer lightning. Jeremiah's wife, Ruth, was cut from the same bitter cloth, a woman who had never forgiven Celeste for being younger, prettier, and French in a household that prided itself on English blood. Celeste had learned quickly that she was not considered family in the Callahan house. She was treated more like an indentured servant, expected to cook, clean, and tend to the livestock without complaint. The only kindness she received came from Thomas, and even that was tempered by his weakness and his family's disapproval. When Thomas defended her against his brother's harsh words, Jeremiah would remind him that Celeste was there only because of her father's debts, and that she should be grateful for the roof over her head. Now, watching Thomas struggle with the firewood, Celeste felt a familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. The doctor from town had been clear during his last visit. Thomas had weeks, maybe days left. And when Thomas died, Celeste's position in the Callahan household would become precarious indeed. She had no legal claim to the ranch, no money of her own, and no family willing to take her back. Her father had died of his drinking 2 years ago, and her mother had remarried and moved to California. Washing her hands of her troublesome daughter, the kitchen door banged open, making Celeste jump. Ruth Callahan swept in, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch the skin of her face tight with perpetual disapproval. She was carrying a basket of eggs from the hen house, and she set it down on the kitchen table with unnecessary force. "Still standing around staring out windows, I see," Ruth said, not bothering to look at Celeste. "The bread needs kneading, the floors need scrubbing, and the butter needs churning. But I suppose you're too delicate for such work." Celeste turned from the window, biting back the sharp reply that sprang to her lips. 3 years of living under Ruth's roof had taught her that arguing only made things worse. "I was just checking on Thomas," she said quietly. "He's been coughing more today." Ruth's laugh was as cold as winter wind. "Thomas is dying, girl. Standing at that window fretting won't change that. What you should be thinking about is what you're going to do when he's gone." She moved closer, her pale eyes glittering with malice. "Because you won't be staying here, that's certain." Before Celeste could respond, heavy footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Jeremiah Callahan filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking the afternoon light. At 45, he was everything Thomas wasn't broad-shouldered. healthy and radiating the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of having absolute power over everyone around him. His eyes swept over Celeste with undisguised contempt. "Ruth's." "Right," Jeremiah said, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "You've been living off Callahan charity long enough. When Thomas passes, you'll pack your things and leave. We've got no obligation to feed and house another man's debt." Celeste's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I've worked for my keep," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "I've cooked your meals, cleaned your house, and tended your sick animals for 3 years without complaint. And you'll continue to do so as long as my brother draws breath," Jeremiah replied coldly. "But that won't be much longer, will it? And when he's gone, so are you." The conversation was interrupted by a violent coughing fit from outside. Through the window, they could see Thomas doubled over, blood staining the front of his shirt. Celeste moved toward the door, but Jeremiah's hand shot out and gripped her arm with bruising force. "Let him be," Jeremiah said. "A man needs to die with some dignity, not coddled by a woman who was never worthy of him in the first place." Celeste jerked her arm free and glared at him. "Thomas is twice the man you'll ever be," she said, her French accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions rose. "And when he's gone, I'll mourn him properly, not celebrate like the vultures you both are." The silence that followed was electric, with tension. Ruth's face went white with rage, and Jeremiah's hand moved instinctively toward the gun belt at his waist. For a moment, Celeste thought he might actually strike her. Then Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes still holding a spark of the gentle man she had grown to care for. "What's all the shouting about?" Thomas asked, his voice raspy from coughing. "Nothing, brother," Jeremiah said, his tone suddenly jovial. "Just discussing the day's chores with your wife." Thomas looked between his brother and Celeste, sensing the tension but lacking the strength to pursue it. "Celeste, would you help me inside? I think I need to rest." She moved to his side immediately, supporting his weight as they made their way to the bedroom. Behind them, she could hear Ruth and Jeremiah speaking in low, urgent tones, but she couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. She could guess what they were planning. Thomas died 3 days later, just as the first snow began to fall. He passed quietly in his sleep, with Celeste holding his hand and whispering prayers in the French her mother had taught her. For all their faults as a marriage, they had found a kind of companionship in their final year together. Thomas had never been cruel to her, never raised his hand or his voice, and in his own quiet way, he had tried to shield her from his family's worst impulses. The funeral was a small affair. The preacher from town made the long ride out to the ranch, along with a handful of neighboring ranchers who had known Thomas since childhood. Celeste stood at the graveside in her black dress, the only good dress she owned, and listened to the wind howl across the grassland like the voices of the dead. She felt numb, not with grief for Thomas, but with fear for what would come next. After the last guest had ridden away and the preacher had returned to town, Celeste found herself alone in the kitchen with Jeremiah and Ruth. The pretense of civility that had been maintained during the funeral evaporated like morning frost. "Well," Ruth said, setting down her coffee cup with a sharp click, "I suppose we can dispense with the pleasantries now." Jeremiah leaned back in his chair, studying Celeste like a cattleman evaluating livestock. "Ruth and I have been talking," he said. "We've decided to be generous. We'll give you until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave. That's more consideration than you deserve." "Leave for where?" Celeste asked, though she already knew the answer. "That's not our concern," Ruth replied with a cold smile. "Perhaps you can find work in town. I'm sure the saloon could use another girl, especially one with your ... experience." The implication was clear and deliberately insulting. Celeste felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and rage. "I was Thomas's wife," she said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you think of me, I was faithful to him."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Were you? Jeremiah asked, his voice deceptively casual. Because I seem to remember you taking long walks by yourself, disappearing for hours at a time. Who's to say what you were really doing out there? The accusation was so outrageous that Celeste could only stare at him in shock. Her walks had been her only escape from the suffocating atmosphere of the house, her only chance to breathe freely and remember who she had been before she became Mrs. Thomas Callahan. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" Jeremiah stood up, his shadow falling across her like a dark promise. "Who would believe you over us? The local sheriff is a friend of mine. The judge in town has known my family for 20 years. If I were to tell them that my late brother's widow was carrying on with other men, who do you think they'd believe?" Celeste realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about getting rid of her. This was about destroying her reputation so thoroughly that she would have no choice but to disappear entirely. No decent family would hire a woman with a ruined reputation. No respectable business would employ her. She would be forced into the kind of life that Ruth had mockingly suggested, if she was lucky enough to survive that long. "You can't do this," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they were hollow. Of course they could do this. They had money, influence, and the unquestioned support of a community that valued property and bloodlines above justice. "Watch us," Ruth said, her smile as sharp as a blade. That night, Celeste lay awake in the bed she had shared with Thomas, staring at the ceiling and trying to think of options. She had no money except for the few coins Thomas had given her over. The year's not enough to get her to the nearest city, let alone start a new life. She had no relatives who would take her in, no friends outside of this isolated valley. The Callahans held all the cards, and they knew it as dawn approached. She heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Heavy boots, Jeremiah's boots. She held her breath, waiting for him to pass, but instead, the footsteps stopped directly outside her door. The handle turned slowly, and Jeremiah's massive silhouette filled the doorway. "Time to go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Unless you'd prefer to work out some other arrangement." The way he looked at her made his meaning clear. Celeste's stomach turned with revulsion and fear. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, trying to maintain some dignity even as terror clawed at her throat. "I need time to pack," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "You've had all night," Jeremiah replied, stepping into the room. "But I'm a reasonable man. We could come to an understanding. You and I, a widow, needs protection in this harsh country. I could provide that protection for the right price." Celeste knew that accepting his protection would make her a prisoner in every way that mattered. She would become his property, subject to his whims and cruelties, with no legal recourse and no hope of escape. "I'd rather take my chances on the road," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Jeremiah's expression darkened. "Would you now?" "Well, maybe you'll change your mind after you've been out there for a few days. These mountains can be unforgiving to a woman traveling alone." An hour later, Celeste found herself sitting in the back of a wagon with her few possessions bundled beside her. Jeremiah held the reins while Ruth sat beside him, both of them wearing expressions of grim satisfaction. They were taking her to town, Jeremiah had announced, though Celeste suspected that was a lie. The road to town led east, but they were heading north, toward the foothills where the settlements grew sparse and the law grew thin. The wagon jolted and swayed over the rough trail, each bump sending fresh waves of fear through Celeste's body. She had tried to leave with some dignity, but the reality of her situation was becoming clearer with each mile. She was completely at the mercy of people who had no mercy to give. After 2 hours of hard travel, Jeremiah pulled the wagon to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. They were at least 15 miles from the ranch now, and twice that distance from town. The isolation was complete and terrifying. "This looks like a good spot," Jeremiah said, climbing down from the wagon seat. "For what?" Celeste asked, though her heart was already racing with the terrible certainty of what was coming. "For saying goodbye," Ruth replied, her smile cold as winter moonlight. Jeremiah walked around to the back of the wagon and grabbed Celeste's arm, hauling her roughly to the ground. Her legs, cramped from the long ride, buckled under her, and she fell to her knees in the dirt. Jeremiah's laugh was harsh and ugly. "Not so proud now, are you?" he said, standing over her like a giant. Not so quick with the sharp words. Celeste struggled to her feet, her mind racing. She could try to run, but where would she go? The forest stretched for miles in every direction, and she was wearing a long dress and thin shoes that were never meant for rough country. Even if she could outrun Jeremiah, which seemed unlikely, she would be lost in the wilderness without food, water, or shelter. "Please," she said, hating herself for begging but seeing no other choice. "Just leave me on the road to town. I'll find my own way from there." "Oh, but this is so much better," Ruth said, climbing down from the wagon with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her life on horseback. "No witnesses, no inconvenient questions. Just you and the wilderness, working things out between yourselves." Jeremiah was already unloading Celeste's belongings from the wagon, but instead of setting them gently on the ground, he was throwing them with deliberate carelessness. Her mother's Bible landed spine first against a rock, its pages scattering in the wind. Her one good dress caught on a thorny bush and tore. The small wooden box that contained her few pieces of jewelry, gifts from Thomas, hit a tree trunk and split open, sending the contents glittering across the forest floor. "Stop!" Celeste cried, lunging forward to save what she could. Jeremiah caught her by the wrist and twisted, sending shooting pain up her arm. "I don't think so," he said. "You won't be needing any of this where you're going." "Which is where exactly?" Celeste demanded, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Ruth's smile was answer enough. They weren't planning to leave her alive. They had brought her out here to kill her, to make sure she could never return to cause them problems, or spread inconvenient truths about Thomas's death or her treatment at their hands. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These people who had sat beside her at Thomas's funeral, who had shared meals at the same table, who had pretended to be civilized human beings, were planning to murder her in cold blood. Fear gave way to fury. If she was going to die, she would not go quietly. Celeste wrenched her arm free from Jeremiah's grip and swung, her fist at his face with all the strength she could muster. Her knuckles connected with his nose in a satisfying crunch of cartilage, and blood spurted across his shirt front. He staggered backward, cursing and holding his injured nose. "You little wildcat," he snarled, his eyes blazing with rage. "I was planning to make this quick, but now I think we'll take our time." Ruth pulled a knife from her belt, a long, sharp blade meant for skinning game. "Should have taken Jeremiah's offer when you had the chance," she said conversationally. "Now you don't get a choice at all." Celeste backed away from them, her heart hammering against her ribs. The forest pressed close around the clearing, dark and forbidding, but offering the only hope of escape she had. If she could reach the trees, if she could lose herself in the undergrowth, maybe she could survive long enough to find help. She turned and ran. The first few steps were pure desperation, her long skirts tangling around her legs and threatening to send her sprawling. Behind her, she could hear Jeremiah and Ruth shouting, could hear their heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. A branch whipped across her face, leaving a stinging cut on her cheek. Another caught her skirt and tore it, but she kept running. The forest floor was treacherous, covered with fallen logs, loose rocks, and hidden holes that could snap an ankle without warning. Celeste's thin shoes provided no protection from the sharp stones and thorns that seemed to reach for her with every step. She could feel blood seeping through the leather, could taste copper in her mouth from where she had bitten her tongue. A gunshot cracked through the trees, close enough to make her ears ring. Wood splintered from a pine trunk just inches from her head. Jeremiah's voice echoed through the forest, rough with exertion and rage. "You can't run forever, girl. These woods go on for miles, and we know them better than you do." Another shot, this one from a different direction. Ruth had circled around to cut off her escape route. Celeste veered left, crashing through a stand of young saplings, their branches leaving fresh cuts on her arms and face. Her lungs burned with the effort of running at this altitude, and she could feel her strength beginning to fade. A third shot, and this time she felt the bullet pass close, enough to ruffle her hair. They were closing in, herding her like a wolf pack driving prey toward a killing ground. The realization filled her with desperate strength, and she pushed herself even harder, leaping over a fallen log and plunging down a steep slope covered with loose shale. The slope was treacherous, and Celeste's feet went out from under her halfway down. She tumbled head over heels, her body slamming against rocks and tree roots, until she fetched up against a massive boulder at the bottom of the ravine. Pain exploded through her ribs and shoulder, and for a moment, the world went gray around the edges. When her vision cleared, she could hear voices above her, Jeremiah and Ruth, arguing about which direction she had gone. The fall had taken her deeper into the forest than they had expected, and the gathering dusk was making it harder for them to track her. "We'll never find her in this light," Ruth was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "Then we'll wait," Jeremiah replied. "She's hurt and lost. The cold will do our work for us." Celeste pressed herself against the boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible. Blood trickled down her face from a cut on her forehead, and every breath sent fresh spikes of agony through her ribs. But she was alive, and as long as she stayed alive, she had a chance. The voices faded as Jeremiah and Ruth moved away, probably heading back to their wagon to wait for morning. Celeste forced herself to her feet, biting back a cry of pain as her injured ribs protested. She had to keep moving. Standing still meant freezing to death, and she had not survived this long just to die of exposure in a Montana forest. The ravine stretched away into darkness, offering concealment, but no clear direction. Celeste chose to follow it downhill, reasoning that water always flowed towards civilization eventually. Her progress was slow and painful, each step sending fresh jolts of agony through her battered body. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her torn dress provided little protection against the mountain cold. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting everything in silver and shadow, beautiful and treacherous. Celeste's strength was failing her, steps becoming more and more unsteady. She could no longer feel her feet, and her hands were so numb she could barely bend her fingers. Hypothermia was setting in, she realized with detached clarity. Soon, she would simply lie down in the snow and never get up again. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt only a strange kind of peace. At least she would die free. At least Jeremiah and Ruth would never have the satisfaction of watching her life end at their hands. She stumbled over a root she hadn't seen and went down hard, her face hitting the frozen ground with enough force to split her lip. This time, she didn't try to get up. She simply lay there, watching her breath steam in the moonlight, and waited for the cold to take her. That was when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. At first, she thought it might be Jeremiah and Ruth coming to finish what they had started. But the sound was wrong, too rhythmic, too controlled. A single horse, moving with purpose rather than haste. Celeste tried to lift her head, but her body no longer seemed to belong to her. The hoofbeats stopped. She heard the soft thud of someone dismounting, then footsteps approaching through the snow. A shadow fell across her vision, and she found herself looking up at a figure that seemed to have stepped out of legend. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin and furs that spoke of a life lived close to the wilderness. His hair was long and black, adorned with feathers and beads that caught the moonlight. His face was strong and weathered, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the mountains. When he knelt beside her, she caught the scent of sage smoke and leather, wild and clean. A crow warrior, she realized dimly. She was dying in crow territory, found by one of the people her own kind had spent generations fighting and fearing. He spoke, but the words were in a language she didn't recognize. His voice was deep and gentle, nothing like the harsh tones she had grown accustomed to from the Halian men. When she didn't respond, he reached out carefully and touched her forehead, checking for fever or injury. His hands were warm and surprisingly gentle for someone who looked so fierce. Celeste tried to speak, to tell him that she was dying, that it was too late for help, but all that came out was a broken whisper. The warrior studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding face, her obvious condition. Then, without a word, he scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Celeste wanted to protest, to tell him she was beyond saving, but the warmth of his body against hers was too seductive to resist. He carried her to his horse, a magnificent paint stallion that stood patiently in the snow, and lifted her onto the animal's back with effortless strength. Then he mounted behind her, wrapping a warm fur robe around them both, and guided the horse away from the ravine where she had been prepared to die. As consciousness finally slipped away from her, Celeste's last coherent thought was wonder. She had expected to die alone and forgotten in the Montana wilderness. Instead, she had been found by a man who looked at her not with the contempt she had grown used to, but with something that might have been compassion. The horse's steady gait rocked her like a cradle, and the warrior's strong arms held her secure against his chest. For the first time in years, Celeste felt truly safe. She did not wake again until morning. Celeste's first sensation was warmth, a deep, penetrating heat that seemed to flow through her bones like honey. For a moment, she thought she might be dead, that this was what the afterlife felt like. Then pain reasserted itself, a symphony of aches from her bruised ribs, her cut face, her frozen feet, and she knew with grim certainty that she was still very much alive. She opened her eyes slowly, expecting to see the gray Montana sky above her, or perhaps the inside of some frontier cabin. Instead, she found herself staring up at a domed ceiling made of carefully arranged lodge poles, covered with what appeared to be buffalo hides stretched taut and decorated with intricate painted designs. Symbols she didn't recognize: eagles, thunderbirds, horses danced across the curved surface in bold reds, blues, and yellows. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents: sage, sweetgrass, wood smoke, and something else she couldn't identify, something earthy and wild that spoke of a life lived entirely different from anything she had known. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices speaking in a language that flowed like water over stone. Celeste tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as her injured ribs screamed in protest. A gentle but firm hand pressed against her shoulder, easing her back down onto what she now realized was the softest bedding she had ever experienced, layers of fur and woven blankets that cradled her body like a cloud. "Easy," a voice said in accented but clear English. "You are safe, but you are hurt. Rest." Celeste turned her head carefully and found herself looking into the face of the man who had saved her. In the flickering firelight, he was even more striking than he had appeared in the moonlit forest. His features were sculpted and strong, with high cheekbones that spoke of generations adapted to this harsh mountain country. His skin was the color of burnished copper, and his dark eyes held an intelligence and gentleness that stood in stark contrast to every story she had ever heard about savage Indians. He was sitting cross-legged beside her bed, and she noticed that he had changed clothes since the rescue. Gone were the trail-worn buckskins, replaced by a shirt of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue and white. His long black hair was neatly braided with strips of leather and small eagle feathers, and around his neck hung a choker made of what looked like bear claws and carved bone. "Who are you?" Celeste whispered, her voice barely audible. The man studied her for a moment before answering. "I am called Soaring Eagle, though white men have trouble with crow names. Some call me Joseph." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "What do I call you, woman who runs through the forest like a deer fleeing wolves?" "Celeste," she managed. "Celeste Beaumont. Callahan." She hesitated over the surname, unsure whether she still had the right to use it now that Thomas was dead. "Celeste," Soaring Eagle repeated, pronouncing each syllable carefully. "A name like music, French?" She nodded, surprised that he could identify the origin of her name. Everything she had been taught about Indians suggested they were ignorant, savages who knew nothing of the outside world. Yet this man spoke English better than many of the cowboys who worked the Callahan ranch, and he had recognized her French heritage immediately. "Your people," she said hesitantly, "they won't mind." "That you brought me here?" Soaring Eagle's expression grew thoughtful. "My people understand mercy," he said simply. "When someone is dying, you help them. It is the way of things." As if summoned by his words, the entrance flap of the lodge opened, and an elderly woman entered carrying a steaming bowl. She was small and weathered, her gray hair braided with strings of shells and colored beads. Her clothes were similar to Soaring Eagle's soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork, but her designs incorporated more traditional women's motifs: flowers, stars, and geometric patterns that seemed to tell a story. The woman approached without hesitation and knelt beside Celeste's bed. She spoke rapidly in Crow, gesturing toward the bowl, and then at Celeste's injuries. Soaring Eagle listened, then translated. "Moonwalker says you must eat," he explained. "She has made healing soup buffalo broth with medicinal herbs. She says you are too thin, that the people who hurt you did not feed you properly." Celeste felt tears spring to her eyes at the kindness in the old woman's voice, even though she couldn't understand the words. "Please tell her thank you," she whispered. Soaring Eagle spoke to Moonwalker and Crow, and the old woman's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed her features completely. She reached out and gently touched Celeste's cheek, murmuring something soft and comforting. "She says you have the look of someone who has forgotten how to be cared for," Soaring Eagle translated. "She wants to help you remember." Moonwalker carefully helped Celeste sit up, supporting her weight with surprising strength for someone so small. The movement sent fresh spikes of pain through her ribs, but the warmth of the broth when it touched her lips was worth the discomfort. The soup was unlike anything she had ever tasted, rich and nourishing, with flavors that seemed to reach into her very bones and coax them back to life. As she ate, Celeste became aware of sounds from outside the lodge: voices, the whinny of horses, children playing, the normal sounds of a community going about its daily business. The realization struck her that she was not just in a single dwelling, but in an entire village. The thought should have terrified her, given everything she had been taught about Indian raids and savage customs. But instead, she felt oddly safe. "How many people live here?" she asked between sips of soup. "This is a winter camp," Soaring Eagle explained. "Perhaps 60 lodges, maybe 300 people. Families, mostly. Elders, children, hunters, craftswomen." He gestured toward the decorated walls of the lodge. "We gather here when the snows come, share stories and skills, wait for spring to call us back to the summer hunting grounds." "And they all know I'm here?" "Word travels quickly in a village this size," he said with a slight smile. "But do not worry. You are under my protection now. No one will harm you." The certainty in his voice was oddly comforting, but it also raised questions that Celeste wasn't sure she was ready to have answered. What exactly did "under his protection" mean? What would be expected of her in return? And what would happen when spring came and it was time to move on? Moonwalker finished feeding her the soup and spoke again to Soaring Eagle, this time at greater length. He nodded seriously, asking questions that the old woman answered with gestures toward Celeste's body and face. She wants to examine your injuries properly, Soaring Eagle explained. Moonwalker is our best healer. She has delivered babies, set broken bones, and treated wounds that other medicine people said were hopeless. But she says she cannot help you if you are afraid of her touch. Celeste looked to the old woman's kind eyes and saw nothing but compassion. Tell her I trust her, she said. What followed was the most thorough medical examination Celeste had ever received. Moonwalker's hands were gentle but sure as she checked each of Celeste's injuries, probing carefully for broken bones, examining cuts and bruises, testing the range of motion in her arms and legs. She spoke constantly as she worked, explaining what she was doing to Soaring Eagle, who translated for Celeste. 3 ribs are cracked but not broken completely, he explained as Moonwalker pressed carefully along Celeste's side. The cuts on your face and hands will heal cleanly if kept clean. Your feet are badly damaged from running without proper shoes, but there is no infection yet. Moonwalker produced a selection of small pots and leather pouches from a bag she had brought with her. The containers held salves and powders made from plants Celeste didn't recognize, each with its own distinctive smell. Some were pleasant like mint or pine, while others were sharp and medicinal. She will make poultices for your feet and ribs. Soaring Eagle continued translating. And a tea that will help you sleep without pain. But she says the most important medicine is rest and proper food. Your body has been starved of both for too long. As Moonwalker worked, applying soothing salves to her cuts and wrapping her injured ribs with strips of soft leather, Celeste found herself studying Soaring Eagle. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke, that suggested education and experience beyond what she would have expected from someone living in what her people would call primitive conditions. May I ask you something? She said hesitantly. He nodded. Ask. You speak English very well. Better than most of the men I knew back at the ranch. Where did you learn? Soaring Eagle was quiet for a moment, and Celeste wondered if she had offended him somehow. Then he spoke, his voice carrying a weight of memory. I learned at the mission school when I was a boy, he said. The black robes, the priests, they took children from the tribes and taught them white man's ways. Read, write, speak English, wear white man's clothes, worship the white man's God. His expression grew distant. They said they were saving our souls, but I think they were trying to kill who we were. How long were you there? 7 years. From the time I was 8 until I was 15 and strong enough to escape. He looked directly at her. I learned many things at that school. How to read the white man's books, how his government works, how his people think. But I also learned that there are 2 kinds of whites, those who see us as people, and those who see us as problems to be solved. The honesty in his voice made Celeste's chest tight with emotion. Which kind do you think I am? Soaring Eagle considered this for a long moment. I think you are someone who has been treated like a problem. By your own people, he said finally. Perhaps that helps you understand what it means to be seen as less than human. His words hit closer to home than Celeste was comfortable with. Moonwalker finished her ministrations and spoke to Soaring Eagle, who nodded and replied in Crow. The old woman gathered her supplies and rose to leave. But before she went, she reached out and took Celeste's hand in both of hers. Pilamayedo, Moonwalker said, her voice warm. Waste. She says rest well, Soaring Eagle translated. And that you are welcome here for as long as you need to heal. After Moonwalker left, silence settled over the lodge. Celeste found herself alone with Soaring Eagle for the first time since waking up, and the awareness of it made her suddenly self-conscious. She was lying in his bed, in his lodge, wearing a soft deerskin dress that someone, probably Moonwalker, had dressed her in while she was unconscious. Her own torn and bloodied clothes were nowhere to be seen. "The dress," she said, touching the soft leather self-consciously. "It's beautiful, moonwalker's work," Soaring Eagle said. "She has no daughters, only sons who have grown and taken wives. I think she is happy to have someone to fuss over again." "And this lodge, is it yours?" He nodded. "My winter home. In summer, I prefer to travel light, but when the snows come, a man needs a place to store his belongings and shelter his horses." "You live alone?" "Yes." The simple answer carried implications that Celeste wasn't sure she was ready to explore. She shifted position carefully, trying to ease the ache in her ribs, and became aware of something else: the complete absence of the fear that had been her constant companion for the past 3 years. Here, in this strange place among people she had been taught to fear, she felt safer than she had in her own bed back at the Halian ranch. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly. Soaring Eagle looked up from the fire he had been tending. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could have left me there to die. Your people and mine were not exactly friends. Some would say you should have let the forest take me. Would you have left me to die if you had found me injured in the snow?" The question caught her off guard. "No," she said without hesitation. "Of course not." "Then you understand why I could not leave you." He paused, stirring the fire with a long stick. "Life is sacred, all life. The deer I hunt, the horse I ride, the woman I find dying in the forest. To waste life when you have the power to save it. Double quote, he shrugged. "That is not the Crow way. But I'm white. After everything my people have done to yours. You are not responsible for what others have done, any more than I am responsible for every raid ever made by Crow warriors." His voice was patient but firm. "I judge people by their actions, not by the color of their skin or the language they speak." Celeste felt tears threatening again. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such simple respect that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. "The people who hurt you," Soaring Eagle said quietly, "they were your family?" Celeste laughed bitterly. "My husband's family. They never considered me part of their family. I was just property that came with a debt they were owed." "Your husband allowed this?" "Thomas was Celeste struggled to find the right words. "He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't strong either. He tried to protect me sometimes, but his brother Jeremiah was the real power in that house. When Thomas got sick, I became even more of a burden. And when he died, they decided I had outlived my usefulness." The words came out flat and matter-of-fact, but Celeste could hear the pain underneath them. "They were going to kill me. They took me out into the forest to make sure my body would never be found." Soaring Eagle's expression darkened. "These people, they live near here?" "About 15 miles south, I think. The Halian ranch." Celeste felt a stab of fear. "You're not thinking of doing anything, are you?" "I mean, I'm grateful to be alive, but I don't want to start a war." "There will be no war," Soaring Eagle said firmly. "But these people should know that you are under Crow protection now. If they come looking for you, they will find more than they bargained for." The possessive note in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through Celeste. Under Crow protection seemed to mean something very specific, though she wasn't entirely sure what. "What happens now?" she asked. "I mean, when I'm healed? I have nowhere to go, no money, no family who would take me in." Soaring Eagle looked at her steadily. "That depends on what you want," he said. "You are free to leave whenever you choose. I will give you a horse and supplies to reach whatever destination you name, or ... He paused, seeming to choose his words. "Carefully, you could stay here in the village? If you wanted to. There are white women who have married into the tribe, made good lives for themselves. It is not common, but it is not unknown either." The suggestion hung in the air between them like smoke from the fire. Celeste's heart began to race, though. Whether from fear or something else, she couldn't say. "You don't even know me," she said weakly. "I know enough," Soaring Eagle replied. "I know you are brave. You fought against people who meant to kill you and nearly escaped. I know you are strong. You survived injuries and cold that would have killed a weaker person. And I know you have been treated poorly by people who should have protected you. That's not much to base a life on. It is more than many marriages. Start with," he said with a slight smile. "Among my people, respect and compatibility matter more than grand passion. Love, if it comes, grows from shared experience and mutual care." Celeste stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. Are you proposing to me?" "I am offering you a choice," Soaring Eagle said carefully. "A place where you would be valued, protected, cared for. Where your children would be welcome and your voice would be heard." "Children?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "If you wanted them, if we were blessed with them." His voice was gentle. "But that is a conversation for when you are healed and have had time to think. For now, rest. Let Moonwalker's medicines do their work. The future will wait." But Celeste found that sleep was elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with the implications of everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she had been dying in the snow, abandoned by the only family she had known. Now she was lying in the lodge of a crow warrior, who spoke of marriage and children as if such things were possible. The strangest part was that the idea didn't terrify her the way it probably should have. Life with Soaring Eagle, even in this alien world, held more promise than anything she had experienced in this civilized world of the Callahan Ranch. As she drifted toward sleep, she could hear the sounds of the village settling in for the night mothers, calling children inside, men discussing the next day's hunt, elders telling stories around fires that had burned since time immemorial. It was a different rhythm of life than anything she had known, but it felt peaceful. For the first time in years, Celeste fell asleep without fear of what the morning might bring. 3 days had passed since Celeste first opened her eyes in Soaring Eagle's lodge, and the transformation in her condition was remarkable. Moonwalker's medicines had worked their magic. The swelling in her face had gone down. The cuts were healing cleanly, and while her ribs still ached with each breath, the sharp stabbing pain had dulled to a manageable throb. More importantly, the hollow look of starvation had begun to fade from her cheeks as the village women took turns bringing her nourishing meals. But physical healing was only part of her recovery. Each day brought new challenges as Celeste struggled to understand not just where she was, but who she was becoming in this strange new world. This morning, she sat outside Soaring Eagle's lodge for the first time, wrapped in a warm buffalo robe, and watching the village come alive around her. Children raced between the lodges, their laughter mixing with the bark of dogs and the soft nickering of horses in the nearby meadow. Women emerged from their homes carrying water vessels toward the stream, while men checked their weapons and discussed the day's hunting prospects in voices that carried the easy confidence of people who had lived this way for generations. What struck Celeste most forcefully was how normal it all seemed. These were not the painted savages of frontier nightmares, but families going about the business of daily life with the same concerns as any community, feeding their children, maintaining their homes, caring for their animals, planning for the future. "You look thoughtful," Soaring Eagle said, settling beside her on a folded blanket. He had returned from checking his horses in the meadow, and his hair still glittered with frost from the morning air. "I'm trying to understand," Celeste said, pulling the buffalo robe closer around her shoulders. "Everything I was taught about your people, it was wrong, wasn't it?" "What were you taught?" "That Indians were bloodthirsty savages who lived like animals, who killed for pleasure, and knew nothing of civilization or family or—" She trailed off, embarrassed by how foolish her words sounded in this peaceful setting. "And what do you see now?" Celeste watched a young mother teaching her daughter to braid sweetgrass, while her baby slept strapped to her back in an elaborately decorated cradleboard. Nearby, an elderly man was carefully crafting arrow points while telling stories to a group of fascinated boys. In the distance, teenage girls laughed as they worked together to tan a deer hide, their technique precise and efficient. "I see people who love their children and take care of each other," Celeste said softly. "I see knowledge and skill and kindness that my own people could learn from." "Your people are not all cruel," Soaring Eagle said diplomatically. "I have known white men and women who were honorable, generous, brave. But fear makes people see monsters where none exist. Why don't they fear you?" Celeste gestured toward the village. "I mean, why have I been accepted so easily? Shouldn't they be suspicious of a white woman in their camp?" Soaring Eagle considered this for a moment. "Some are suspicious," he admitted. "But Crow people judge by actions, not by blood. You were brought here as someone in need of help, under my protection. That gives you a place at least temporarily. And if I stayed permanently? That would require something more." His dark eyes met hers. "It would require you to become Crow and more than just residents." Before Celeste could ask what he meant by that, a commotion near the edge of the village caught their attention. A group of riders was approaching warriors returning from what looked like a successful hunt, judging by the deer carcasses draped across their pack horses. But something about their posture, the way they sat their mounts, suggested tension rather than celebration. Soaring Eagle rose smoothly to his feet, his expression suddenly alert. "Wait here," he told Celeste, and strode toward the returning hunters. Even from a distance, Celeste could tell the conversation was serious. Voices were raised, gestures sharp and urgent. Other villagers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. After several minutes of heated discussion, Soaring Eagle returned to her side, his face grim. "What is it?" Celeste asked, though part of her already suspected. White men were seen near the summer hunting grounds, about a day's ride south. 3 riders well armed, searching for something. His jaw tightened. Or someone. Celeste's blood turned to ice. "The Calahans, most likely." The hunters said they were asking questions at the trading post, offering money for information about any Indians who might have taken a white woman. Fear clawed at Celeste's throat. "They found me." "No," Soaring Eagle said firmly. "They have found evidence that you survived, nothing more. And they are not welcome on Crow land." "You don't understand," Celeste said, gripping his arm. "Jeremiah Callahan is not the kind of man who gives up easily. He has connections, influence. If he tells the territorial authorities that Indians kidnapped a white woman, let him tell them." Soaring Eagle's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of steel. "We have treaties with the government. This is sovereign Crow territory. They cannot simply ride in and take what they want." Celeste wished she shared his confidence, but she had lived among white men long enough to know how little treaties meant when it came to getting what they wanted. Still, the protective certainty in Soaring Eagle's voice was oddly comforting. "What do we do?" she asked. "We prepare. And we make sure you are ready to truly belong here, if that is what you choose." The next hours passed in a flurry of activity that seemed carefully orchestrated to keep Celeste's mind off the approaching threat. Moonwalker appeared with a group of other women, all carrying baskets and bundles of what looked like clothing and tools. "Today you learn women's work," Moonwalker announced through Soaring Eagle's translation. "If you stay with us, you must contribute to the life of the village." What followed was Celeste's first real education in Crow domestic life, and it proved far more complex and demanding than anything she had experienced as a ranch wife. The Crow women were masters of efficiency and skill, turning raw materials into the necessities of life with techniques passed down through generations. First came hide preparation. Celeste watched in fascination as the women demonstrated the process of turning a fresh deer hide into soft, supple leather suitable for clothing. Every step required specific knowledge, which plants to use for tanning, how long to soak the hide, the precise technique for scraping away hair and flesh, without damaging the skin underneath. "This is women's medicine," explained Sharp Knife Woman, a middle-aged craftsperson whose hands moved with the certainty of decades of practice. "Men hunt the deer, but women give it new life as clothing, shelter, tools. Both skills are necessary." Celeste's first attempts were clumsy and inefficient, but the women corrected her patiently, showing her how to hold the scraping tool, how to read the texture of the hide to know when it was ready for the next step. Their teaching style was completely different from anything she had experienced. No harsh criticism or impatient sighs, just gentle guidance and encouragement. "White women learn differently," observed Painted Horse Woman, watching Celeste struggle with a particularly stubborn piece of sinew. "You think too much with your head, not enough with your hands. Feel the hide, let it tell you what it needs." It was a revelation to Celeste that learning could be this collaborative, this supportive. In the white world she had known, knowledge was often hoarded, used as a source of power over others. Here, it was shared freely, as if the success of one woman contributed to the strength of all. As the day progressed, Celeste found herself drawn deeper into the rhythms of village life. She learned to identify edible plants that could be gathered even in winter, to weave baskets from willow branches, to prepare pemmican, the nutritious traveling food made from dried meat, fat, and berries that could sustain a person for days. More than practical skills, she was learning a different way of seeing the world. Everything had its place in an intricate web of relationships, between people and animals, between the living and the spirit world, between individual needs and community welfare. "Crow people understand balance," Moonwalker explained as they worked together to grind dried berries for winter storage. "Take only what you need, give back more than you take, honor the gifts of earth and sky. This is how the world stays in harmony." "What happens when the balance is broken?" Celeste asked. Moonwalker's expression grew serious. "Then there is suffering, hunger, sickness, war. The earth itself becomes angry." She glanced toward the edge of the village where scouts kept watch for any sign of the approaching white men. "Some people take too much, give back nothing. They break the balance for everyone." The comment was clearly directed at more than just ecological concerns, and Celeste found herself wondering what role she might play in the delicate equilibrium of this community. Was she a disruption, bringing danger and conflict to people who had shown her nothing but kindness? Or could she somehow contribute to the balance in her own way? As afternoon wore toward evening, the work shifted to food preparation for the communal meal that marked the end of each day. Celeste watched in amazement as the women transformed simple ingredients into a feast that would feed the entire village. Stews bubbled over multiple fires, bread cooked on hot stones, and vegetables roasted in underground pits that had been heating since morning. "In White World, women cook alone in their houses," observed Dancing Cloud, a young mother who worked, while her toddler played at her feet. Why make eating such lonely work? It was a good question. Celeste thought of the hours she had spent in the Halian kitchen, cooking meal after meal in isolation while the family barely acknowledged her efforts. Here, food preparation was a social activity, filled with conversation, laughter, and the easy cooperation of women who knew their roles and took pride in their skills. "We eat together because we live together," Sharp Knife Woman added, seasoning a pot of stew with herbs that filled the air with aromatic steam. "Food shared tastes better than food eaten alone." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the entire village gathered for the evening meal. Celeste found herself seated between Soaring Eagle and Moonwalker, part of a circle that included people of all ages from grandparents to infants. The food was passed in wooden bowls, each person taking what they needed and ensuring that everyone else was served before taking seconds. The conversation flowed between English and Crow, with frequent translations for Celeste's benefit. She learned about the hunter's success, about plans for winter ceremonies, about the progress of children learning traditional skills. But underlying all the normal community discussion was an awareness of the threat beyond the village borders. The white men are still at the trading post, reported Red Hawk, one of the scouts who had been monitoring the situation. They have made camp there for the night. The trader says they plan to begin searching the area tomorrow. Let them search, said Iron Bull, an elder whose white hair was braided with eagle feathers that spoke of his status as a war leader. They have no authority here. If they enter our territory uninvited, they will be asked to leave. And if they refuse? Asked another voice. Iron Bull's smile was sharp as winter wind. Then they will be encouraged more forcefully. Celeste felt Soaring Eagle tense beside her. There should be no violence, he said carefully. Not unless they force it. A war with the whites would bring soldiers, and soldiers bring death to everyone. So we let them take what they want? Iron Bull's voice carried a challenge. Let them ride into our village and claim our women as if we were powerless? I am not their woman to be claimed, Celeste said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly across the circle. Every conversation stopped, and she realized that all eyes were on her. Her heart raced, but she continued. I chose to be here. I choose to stay here. And no one white or Indian has the right to make that choice for me. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Iron Bull began to laugh, a sound like distant thunder that was soon joined by other voices around the circle. This one has the heart of a warrior, he said approvingly. Perhaps she is worth fighting for after all. But Soaring Eagle was not laughing. Fighting will not solve this problem, he said. If Celeste is to stay among us, she must do more than declare her choice. She must become one of us in the eyes of both our people and theirs. What do you mean? Celeste asked, though she suspected. She already knew. I mean, Soaring Eagle said, looking directly at her, that the time for slow courtship has passed. If you want the protection of Crow law, you must accept the responsibilities of Crow life. You must become my wife, not just in intention, but in ceremony recognized by both our peoples. The proposal hung in the air like smoke from the central fire. Around the circle, Celeste could see faces watching her with varying degrees of interest, approval, and concern. This was not just a personal decision, she realized. It was a political statement that would affect the entire community. Moon. Walker leaned close and spoke softly in Crow. Soaring Eagle translated. She says the choice is yours, but you should know that marriage among our people is more than a joining of two hearts. It is a joining of two spirits, to families, two ways of being in the world. Once made, it cannot be easily unmade. Celeste looked around the circle of faces, these people who had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go, who had shared their food and knowledge and protection without asking for anything in return. Then she looked at Soaring Eagle, this man who spoke of balance and harmony, who had saved her life and offered her a future she had never dared to imagine. When? She asked simply. Tomorrow, Iron Bull said before Soaring Eagle could answer. Before the white men can gather their courage to search this far north. Once you are properly married under Crow law, they will have no legal claim to you under any authority. Tomorrow, Soaring Eagle agreed, his dark eyes searching Celeste's face. If that is what you truly want. Celeste thought of the alternative returning to the white world where she would always be an outsider, always dependent on the mercy of people who saw her as property to be disposed of. Then she thought of what she had learned in just 3 days among the Crowabout community, about respect, about a way of life that valued wisdom and cooperation over domination and greed. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to. Tomorrow. The circle erupted in approving murmurs and excited discussion about preparations for the ceremony. But Celeste barely heard them. She was looking at Soaring Eagle, trying to read the expression in his dark eyes. Was it relief she saw there? Satisfaction? Or something deeper and more complex? Are you certain? He asked quietly, leaning close so that only she could hear. This is not a decision you can change your mind about when the danger has passed. No, Celeste said. And I'm not making this choice because I'm afraid of the Callahans. I'm making it because for the first time in my life, I feel like I've found a place where I belong. Soaring Eagle studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then tomorrow we will make it official, he said. And the day after that, if Jeremiah Callahan wants to challenge Crow Law, he will find himself facing more than he bargained for. As the evening meal concluded and people began to drift back to their lodges, Celeste remained by the fire with Moonwalker and several other women, who immediately began discussing the preparations needed for tomorrow's ceremony. There were clothes to be prepared, food to be cooked, relatives to be notified, ceremonies to be planned. Crow wedding is not like white wedding, Moonwalker explained through a younger woman who spoke better English. No long church service, no big party, but very serious ceremony. Once completed, you will be Crow Woman, with all rights and responsibilities that brings. What kind of responsibilities? Celeste asked. To your husband, to his family, to the tribe, the translator explained. To learn our ways, speak our language, raise children in our traditions, if you are blessed with them. To contribute your skills to the welfare of all. It sounded overwhelming, but also strangely appealing. Celeste had spent her entire adult life trying to meet the expectations of people who would never truly accept her. Here was a chance to belong somewhere completely, to be valued for what she could contribute, rather than tolerated for what she represented. I want to learn, she said. All of it. I want to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. Moonwalker smiled and patted her hand. Learning takes time, she said in her careful English, but you have good heart. That is most important thing. As the women dispersed to begin their preparations, Soaring Eagle walked Celeste back to his lodge. Tomorrow night, it would be their lodge. The thought sent a shiver of nervous anticipation through her. Second thoughts? He asked, noticing her expression. No, Celeste said firmly. Just trying to imagine what my life will be like a week from now. It's going to be so different from anything I've ever known. Different can be good, Soaring Eagle said, especially when the old life brought you more pain than joy. He was right, of course. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they had to be better than the slow death of spirit she had been experiencing at the Callahan Ranch. Here, at least she would be an equal partner in her own fate. As they reached the lodge, Soaring Eagle paused. Celeste, he said seriously, I want you to know that I do not expect you to. That is, tomorrow we will be married in law, but that does not mean. He stopped, clearly struggling with how to phrase something delicate. You're saying you won't force yourself on me, Celeste said, understanding his concern. Yes, marriage should grow from mutual respect and care, not from obligation or desperation. We have time to know each other properly. His consideration touched her deeply. In the white world she had known, wives were expected to submit to their husbands' demands regardless of their own feelings. The idea that her consent would matter, that her comfort would be considered, was almost revolutionary. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. For saving my life, for giving me choices, for treating me like a person worth caring about. You are worth caring about, Soaring Eagle said simply. Tomorrow you will be my wife. But tonight, rest well. Tomorrow will bring enough challenges without facing them tired. As Celeste settled into the soft furs of her bed tomorrow, their bed, she listened to the quiet sounds of the village settling in for the night. Somewhere out there, Jeremiah and Ruth Callahan were planning to reclaim what they saw as their property. But here, surrounded by people who had chosen to accept her as family, Celeste felt a strength she had never known she possessed. Tomorrow she would become a crow woman. And after that, let the Callahans try to take her if they dared. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Crow village, painting the lodge covers in shades of gold and amber. Celeste woke to the sound of women's voices outside Soaring Eagle's lodge, speaking in hushed, excited tones. Today was her wedding day, a thought that should have filled her with terror, but instead brought an unexpected sense of peace. Moonwalker entered the lodge carrying an armload of garments, followed by Sharp, Knife Woman, and 3 other women whose names Celeste was still learning. Their faces were solemn but kind, and she realized this was more than just preparation for a ceremony. This was her formal induction into the sisterhood of Crow women. "Today you become one of us," Moonwalker said in her careful English, laying out the wedding dress on a buffalo hide. Not just in law, but in spirit. The dress was unlike anything Celeste had ever seen. Made of the softest doeskin, it was decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue, white, and yellow that seemed to tell a story. Elk teeth, symbols of honor and prosperity, adorned the bodice, while fringes along the sleeves and hem would move like water when she walked. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of master artisans. "This belonged to Soaring Eagle's mother," Sharp Knife Woman explained through the translator. "She died when he was young, but she made this dress for the woman who would one day become her son's wife. She had ... how do you say, vision dreams about you." Celeste's breath caught. She dreamed about me? But how could she know? "Crow women sometimes see the future in dreams," Moonwalker said simply. She saw a woman with hair like sunlight, who would come from the white world, but choose to become Crow. She saw a woman who would bring healing to old wounds. As the women helped her dress, Celeste felt the weight of generations settling around her shoulders. This wasn't just a wedding dress, it was a sacred garment that connected her to a lineage of women who had loved, suffered, and endured in this harsh but beautiful land. The final touch was a headband made of silver conchos and eagle feathers, a piece so magnificent that Celeste gasped when she saw it. "This is too precious," she protested. "I'm not worthy of something so beautiful." "Worth is not given," said an elderly woman named Grandmother Elk. "Worth is chosen. You chose to stay when you could have left. You chose to learn when you could have remained ignorant. You chose love when you could have chosen fear. That makes you worthy." Outside the lodge, the village had transformed overnight. A large circle had been cleared in the center of the camp, with buffalo robes spread on the ground for seating. A sacred fire burned in the center, tended by Iron Bull, who had donned his ceremonial regalia for the occasion. Eagle feathers, bear claws, and intricate beadwork marked him clearly as a man of power and authority. Soaring Eagle waited by the fire, and Celeste's breath caught when she saw him. Gone were his everyday buckskins, replaced by clothing that marked him as a man of status and spiritual power. His shirt was made of white buckskin, decorated with porcupine quill work and geometric patterns that hurt the eyes to look at directly. His leggings were fringed and beaded, and around his neck hung a choker made of grizzly bear claws, each one representing a feat of courage. But it was his face that held her attention. The easy friendliness she had grown accustomed to had been replaced by something deeper and more formal. This was Soaring Eagle, the warrior, the protector, the spiritual leader of his people. He was magnificent and slightly terrifying, and in a few minutes, he would be her husband. As Celeste approached the circle, guided by Moonwalker and the other women, she became aware of the entire village watching her with a mixture of curiosity, approval, and something she couldn't quite identify. Acceptance? Hope? Or perhaps just the natural interest that surrounded any major change in the community's structure. Iron Bull raised his arms, and silence fell over the gathering. When he spoke, His voice carried the authority of ages, even though Celeste couldn't understand most of his words. But she didn't need translation to feel the power of the ceremony, the sense that something sacred was taking place. "He calls upon the spirits of earth and sky to witness this joining," whispered White Dove, a young woman who spoke excellent English. "He asks for blessings of prosperity, fertility, and long life. He reminds everyone that marriage is not just between two people, but between two souls choosing to walk the same path." Soaring Eagle stepped forward and spoke in Crow, his voice strong and clear. Then he repeated his words in English, looking directly at Celeste. "I take this woman as my wife, to protect and provide for, to honor and cherish, to stand beside in times of plenty and times of want. I promise to see her not as property to be owned, but as a partner to be valued. I promise to learn from her wisdom as I hope she will learn from mine." Iron Bull turned to Celeste, speaking in Crow. White Dove translated quickly. "He asks if you accept this man as your husband, with all the responsibilities and rights that brings. He asks if you will honor Crow ways and raise any children in the traditions of the people. He asks if you choose this freely, with no coercion or force." Celeste's heart hammered as she realized the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just about escaping the Callahans or finding safety. This was about choosing an entirely new identity, a new way of being in the world. "I do," she said clearly, first in English, then struggling through the Crow words that Moonwalker had taught her. "I choose this freely. I choose to become Crow. I choose Soaring Eagle as my husband, and this people as my family." Iron Bull smiled, the first time she had seen genuine warmth in his stern features. He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a handful of sweetgrass, which he threw onto the sacred fire. The smoke rose in fragrant clouds, carrying their vows to the spirit world. "By the law of the Crow people, witnessed by the spirits and the community, you are now husband and wife," Iron Bull declared in both languages. "What has been joined in ceremony cannot be separated by the will of outsiders." The timing of his words proved prophetic. Even as the villagers began to cheer and move forward to offer congratulations, a commotion arose from the edge of the camp. Shouts and the thunder of hoofbeats announced the arrival of unwelcome guests. Jeremiah Callahan rode into the village circle like an avenging angel, his face dark with fury and his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Behind him came Ruth, equally grim-faced, and a third man Celeste didn't recognize, lean and hard-looking, with the cold eyes of a professional gunfighter. "That's far enough," Iron Bull said calmly, not moving from his position by the sacred fire. Jeremiah pulled his horse to a stop just outside the ceremonial circle, his eyes fixed on Celeste with an expression of possessive rage. "I've come for my brother's widow," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "That woman belongs with her own kind, not living in sin with savages." "I am not your brother's widow anymore," Celeste said, stepping closer to Soaring Eagle. "I am the wife of Soaring Eagle, married under Crow law. I belong here now." "Crow law means nothing," Ruth spat, her face twisted with hatred. "You're a white woman, and you'll come back with us where you belong, or face the consequences." "What consequences?" Soaring Eagle asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have no authority here. This is sovereign Crow territory, recognized by treaty with your government." The gunfighter urged his horse forward slightly, his hand conspicuously close to his weapon. "Treaties can be renegotiated," he said, with a cold smile, "especially when they involve the kidnapping of white women by hostile Indians." "There was no kidnapping," Celeste said firmly. "I was dying in the forest, and Soaring Eagle saved my life. I chose to stay here. I chose to marry him. No one forced me to do anything." "Chose?" Jeremiah laughed harshly. "A woman doesn't choose to live like an animal. You've been brainwashed, corrupted by these heathens. But don't worry, we'll get you proper medical attention once we get you back to civilization. Iron Bull stepped forward, and suddenly the air was thick with tension. Around the circle, Celeste could see crow warriors moving casually but purposefully, positioning themselves to surround the intruders. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. The village was preparing for trouble. "You will leave now, Iron Bull said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You are not welcome here. The woman has made her choice under our law and yours. She is married now, beyond your reach." "Married to a savage in a heathen ceremony," Ruth said contemptuously. "That's not a real marriage. That's just ... just fornication dressed up with pagan rituals." The insult to their most sacred ceremony sent a ripple of anger through the crow gathering. Several young warriors took steps forward, hands moving toward weapons. The situation was on the verge of exploding into violence. "Enough," Soaring Eagle said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You came here demanding something that is not yours to take. You have been told why your demand cannot be met. Now you will leave, or you will be made to leave." The gunfighter's hand moved closer to his pistol. "3 against a whole village," he said with a twisted smile. "Those aren't good odds. But sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are bad." "What's right?" Celeste said, stepping out of the circle and walking toward the mounted intruders, "is for people to be free to choose their own lives. What's right is for women to be treated as human beings, not property to be traded and discarded. What's right is for families to be based on love and respect, not fear and control." She stopped just a few feet from Jeremyr's horse, close enough to see the rage and confusion warring in his eyes. "You never wanted me as family, Jeremyr. You made that clear every day for 3 years. You tried to kill me rather than let me find happiness somewhere else. So don't stand there and pretend this is about my welfare. This is about your pride, nothing more." "You're coming back with us," Jeremyr said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. The presence of so many armed warriors was clearly making him reconsider his options. "No," Celeste said simply. "I'm not." She turned and walked back to Soaring Eagle's side, taking his hand in a gesture that was both intimate and defiant. "I am Celeste, wife of Soaring Eagle, member of the Crow Nation. These are my people now. This is my home. And if you try to take me from here by force, you'll find out just how fiercely the Crow protect their own." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, the only sound the restless stamping of horses and the crackle of the sacred fire. Then Jeremyr slowly straightened in his saddle, his face a mask of frustrated rage. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a promise and a threat. "The territorial authorities will hear about this. They'll know that hostile Indians are harboring white captives. Let them come," Iron Bull said calmly. "We have nothing to hide. Our marriage ceremonies are recognized by your own courts when convenient. The woman chose freely, with witnesses. Your authorities will find no crime here." Ruth pointed a shaking finger at Celeste. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When winter comes and you're starving in some filthy tippy, when you're birthing half-breed babies that will never be accepted by either world, you'll remember what you threw away." "I'll remember," Celeste said quietly, "that I chose love over fear, freedom over bondage, and a future over a past that held nothing but pain." The 3 white visitors sat their horses for another moment, clearly hoping for some sign of weakness or second thoughts from Celeste. When none came, Jeremyr wheeled his mount around with unnecessary violence. "Come on," he said to his companions. "Let's get out of this nest of savages." But this isn't finished, not by a long shot. As the 3 riders galloped away, raising a cloud of dust that drifted across the ceremonial circle, a cheer went up from the Crow villagers. But Celeste felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for the waste of it all. These people had been her family for 3 years, however reluctantly. Now they were enemies, and the knowledge hurt more than she had expected. Soaring Eagle squeezed her hand gently. "Are you all right?" "I will be," Celeste said, watching the dust settle where the riders had disappeared. "They're gone, but they'll be back. You know that, don't you?" "Let them come," Soaring Eagle said, echoing Iron Bull's words. "You are one of us now, and the Crow take care of their own." As the celebration resumed around them, with food being distributed and congratulations offered, Celeste felt the truth of his words settling into her bones. For the first time in her life, she truly belonged somewhere. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as part of a people who valued courage, loyalty, and love above all else. The sacred fire burned on, carrying their vows to the spirits, sealing a bond that no earthly authority could break. 3 weeks after the wedding, the territorial authorities came calling. Celeste was grinding corn with Moonwalker and several other women when the sound of approaching wagons broke the peaceful rhythm of their work. Through the early morning mist, a procession emerged that made her blood run cold. 6 mounted soldiers in blue uniforms, a black carriage bearing official government seals, and riding alongside them, Jeremiah Callahan with a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Federal marshals," observed White Dove grimly, recognizing the insignia. "And a territorial judge by the look of that carriage." The grinding stones fell silent as women throughout the village stopped their work to watch the approaching delegation. This was what they had all been expecting, but the reality of it was still chilling. The full weight of the United States government was bearing down on their small community, armed with laws and prejudices that could destroy everything they held dear. Soaring Eagle emerged from their lodge, his face calm but his eyes alert. He had been expecting this confrontation since the day Jeremiah rode away, and Celeste could see that he was ready for it. Iron Bull appeared from the direction of the horse herd, flanked by several other tribal leaders. The Crow were prepared to meet this challenge with dignity and strength. The official party stopped at the edge of the village circle, maintaining the formal distance that protocol demanded. A portly man in black robes climbed down from the carriage with obvious difficulty, his soft features and pale skin marking him clearly as someone more comfortable in courtrooms than frontier camps. "I am Judge Harrison Blackwood of the Territorial Court," he announced in a voice that carried across the village. "I am here on official business regarding the illegal detention of a white woman by members of this tribal community." "There is no illegal detention here," Iron Bull replied calmly, stepping forward as the acknowledged leader. "All members of this village are here by choice." Judge Blackwood consulted a sheaf of papers with theatrical precision. "I have here a sworn affidavit from Jeremiah Callahan stating that his deceased brother's widow was taken against her will and is being held in violation of both territorial and federal law." "Mr. Callahan is lying," Celeste said, rising from her place among the women and walking into the circle. She was wearing traditional Crow dress, her hair braided with beads and feathers, her transformation from frightened widow to confident tribal woman complete. "I was dying in the forest when my husband found me. He saved my life and offered me shelter. I chose to stay, and I chose to marry him under Crow law." Judge Blackwood studied her with undisguised distaste, taking in her native clothing and obvious comfort in these surroundings. "Mrs. Callahan, you appear to be suffering from some form of mental disturbance. The stress of your captivity has clearly affected your judgment." "My name is not Mrs. Callahan," Celeste replied firmly. "I am Celeste, wife of Soaring Eagle, member of the Crow Nation, and my judgment has never been clearer." "Indian marriages are not recognized by territorial law," the judge said dismissively. "In the eyes of civilization, you remain the widow of Thomas Callahan, and as such, you are the responsibility of his family." Jeremiah stepped forward, his satisfaction barely concealed. "Your Honor, as you can see, this poor woman has been completely corrupted by her time among these savages. She needs proper medical care and spiritual guidance to recover from her ordeal. The only ordeal I suffered, Celeste said, her voice rising with controlled anger, was at the hands of the Halian family. They starved me, worked me like a slave, and when Thomas died, they tried to murder me in the wilderness. That's a serious accusation, Judge Blackwood said, though his tone suggested he didn't take it seriously. Do you have any proof of these claims? I have the scars they left on my body, Celeste replied. I have witnesses who can testify to my condition when I was found. And I have the simple logic that if I had been kidnapped, I would have tried to escape or signal for help during these past weeks. Savage witchcraft can corrupt even the strongest Christian mind, Jeremiah interjected smoothly. She's been subjected to heathen rituals and unnatural influences. She's not responsible for her current delusions. The casual dismissal of her mental capacity enraged Celeste more than any direct insult could have. I am not delusional, she said, stepping closer to the judge's carriage. I am a woman who escaped from people who treated me worse than an animal, and found refuge among people who treat me like a human being. If that makes me crazy, then sanity is overrated. Mrs. Halian, Judge Blackwood said with exaggerated patience, I understand that your ordeal has been traumatic. But you must understand that white women cannot simply abandon civilization to live among Indians. There are proprieties to consider, moral standards to uphold. Whose morality? Soaring Eagle asked, speaking for the first time since the officials arrived. The morality that allows a man to beat his brother's wife? The morality that treats women as property to be disposed of when convenient? The morality that judges people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character? Judge Blackwood turned his attention to Soaring Eagle with obvious disdain. You will address the court properly, Savage. The insult sent a ripple of tension through the Crow warriors, but Soaring Eagle remained calm. I am Soaring Eagle, War, Chief of the Mountain Crow, graduate of the Carlisle Indian School, and a student of law at your own territorial university before I chose to return to my people. I am fully qualified to discuss legal matters with any court. The revelation clearly caught Judge Blackwood off guard. He had not expected to face an educated adversary who could challenge him on legal grounds. Even so, the judge said, recovering his composure, the law is clear. White women cannot be permitted to live as squaws among hostile tribes. This tribe is not hostile, Soaring Eagle replied evenly. We are at peace with the territorial government and in full compliance with all treaty obligations. As for Mrs. Celeste, he corrected himself, she is here voluntarily and has committed no crime. The crime, Jeremiah said venomously, is against nature itself. A white woman debasing herself with a red savage, polluting her blood and her soul. The words hung in the air like poison, and Celeste felt something break inside her. All the pain, humiliation, and fear that she had suffered at the hands of these people crystallized into a white-hot fury that burned away any lingering doubt about her choices. How dare you, she said, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you speak of debasement when you tried to force yourself on me the night after your brother's funeral? How dare you speak of pollution when you beat me unconscious and left me to die rather than give me the few dollars I needed to start over somewhere else? The accusation hit Jeremiah like a physical blow. His face went white, then red with fury. That's a lie, is it? Celeste turned to Judge Blackwood. Your Honor, I am prepared to testify under oath about everything the Halian family did to me. I can describe in detail the bruises they left on my body, the threats they made, the way they dragged me into the wilderness and left me for dead. If you want to discuss crimes, let's discuss attempted murder. Judge Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The case was clearly not proceeding as he had expected. These are serious charges, Mrs. That is, young woman. But they would need to be proven in a proper court of law. Then let's go to court, Celeste said boldly. Let Jeremiah Callahan face a jury and explain why he thought he had the right to kill his brother's widow. Let him explain why he hired a gunfighter to intimidate peaceful Indians. Let him explain why he's so desperate to get me back when he never wanted me in the first place. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Jeremiah's face was dark with rage, but she could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. A public trial would mean public scrutiny, and there were aspects of his behavior that would not stand up well under examination. This is ridiculous, he blustered. The woman is clearly out of her mind. She needs medical treatment, not a courtroom. I'll tell you what, Soaring Eagle said, his voice cutting through Jeremiah's protests. Let's settle this in a way that respects both white law and Crow tradition. Let Celeste speak for herself without coercion from either side. If she chooses to leave with you, we will not stop her. But if she chooses to stay, you will respect that choice and trouble us no more. Judge Blackwood considered this proposal, clearly weighing the political implications. A prolonged legal battle would be expensive and messy, especially if it involved accusations of attempted murder against prominent local citizens. Very well, he said finally. Mrs. Dot, Celeste will be given the opportunity to state her preference, clearly and without duress. But I warn you, if there is any evidence of coercion or witchcraft, I will bring the full force of federal law down on this village. There will be no coercion, Iron Bull said solemnly. The choice will be hers alone. All eyes turned to Celeste as she stood in the center of the circle, caught between two worlds that could hardly be more different. On one side stood the representatives of the civilization she had been born into, a world of laws and proprieties that had never protected her when she needed protection. On the other side stood the people who had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go, who had given her value and purpose and love. The choice, when it came down to it, was not difficult at all. I choose to remain here, Celeste said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent village. I choose my husband, my people, and my life as a member of the Crow Nation. I renounce any claim the Callahan family might think they have over me, and I ask you all to respect my decision. Judge Blackwood nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he found the whole situation distasteful. Very well. The record will show that the woman known as Celeste has chosen to remain with the Crow tribe of her own free will. Mr. Callahan, your complaint is dismissed. Jeremiah's face was a mask of frustrated rage, but he was clearly unwilling to push the matter further in front of federal witnesses. This isn't over, he said quietly, the words meant for Celeste alone. Yes, it is, she replied firmly. It's over, Jeremiah. I'm beyond your reach now, and I always will be. As the official party prepared to depart, Judge Blackwood turned back to address the village one final time. This matter is concluded, he announced. But let it be understood that this community will be watched carefully. Any reports of hostile activity or violations of treaty obligations will be dealt with swiftly and severely. We understand, Iron Bull replied with dignity. We have always honored our agreements, and we will continue to do so. As the wagons and riders disappeared into the morning mist, Celeste felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The legal threat was over. The past was finally, truly behind her. Soaring Eagle came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers with the natural ease of a man claiming his rightful place. Are you satisfied with your choice? He asked quietly. Celeste looked around at the faces surrounding her moonwalker, beaming with pride. Iron Bull nodding his approval, children peeking out from behind their mothers with curious eyes. These were her people now, her family, her future. Completely, she said, squeezing his hand. I'm finally home. 1 year later, the spring of 1875, brought changes to the Crow village that would have seemed impossible the year before. Celeste knelt by the stream that ran through the valley, washing clothes in the traditional way Moonwalker had taught her, but her movements were careful and deliberate. The gentle swell of her belly, now 5 months along, made bending difficult, but she had never been happier to struggle with such a simple task. "You should not be doing that work," Soaring Eagle said, approaching from behind with his arms full of freshly caught trout. Moonwalker said, "You must rest more." Celeste laughed, the sound carrying across the water like music. Moonwalker says, "Many things. If I listened to all of them, I would spend the next 4 months lying on buffalo robes, being fed like a chief's favorite horse." "That does not sound so terrible," Soaring Eagle said, settling beside her on the bank. His English had improved remarkably over the past year, partly from teaching it to the village children, and partly from the long conversations he and Celeste shared each evening by their fire. "It sounds boring," Celeste replied, wringing out one of his shirts with practiced efficiency. "I have too much to do to spend my time lying around." And indeed, she did have much to do. What had started as simple language lessons for Crow children had evolved into something much more ambitious. Celeste had established the first school in the village, teaching both English and reading to anyone who wanted to learn. The classes met under a large cottonwood tree that provided shade in summer and shelter from light snow in winter. The school had been Moonwalker's idea, actually. The old woman had observed that the white world was not going away, and that Crow children would need to understand both cultures to survive in the changing times ahead. But unlike the government boarding schools that tore children away from their families, this school allowed them to learn white skills while remaining grounded in Crow traditions. "The children grow smart very fast," Soaring Eagle observed, watching a group of youngsters practice writing letters in the dirt near the village edge. "Little Hawk can read better than most white men who come to trade." "He has a gift for it," Celeste agreed. "And his sister Dancing Bird understands numbers better than I do. They could go to university someday if they wanted to." The thought still amazed her. A year ago, she had been a woman with no future, no choices, no value except as property to be disposed of. Now she was a teacher, a wife, an expectant mother, and a respected member of a community that valued her contributions. Her pregnancy had been a source of great joy throughout the village. Crow culture prized children above almost everything else, and the prospect of a baby who would bridge two worlds had captured everyone's imagination. Moonwalker had declared that the child would be born with special gifts, able to walk in both the white world and the Crow world with equal ease. "This baby will be a translator," the old woman had said, placing her weathered hands on Celeste's belly. "Not just of words, but of hearts. Will help both peoples understand each other." Celeste hoped Moonwalker was right. The world beyond their valley was changing rapidly, and she could see storm clouds gathering on the political horizon. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills had brought more white settlers to the region, and tensions between the various tribes and the government were escalating. The Crow had managed to maintain their neutrality so far, but Celeste feared that would become increasingly difficult. "I received word from the agency today," Soaring Eagle said, his voice growing serious. "The Indian agent wants to meet with our leaders next month. There's talk of changes to our treaty." Celeste's hands stilled in the water. "What kind of changes?" "Smaller reservation, more restrictions on hunting and movement, and ... He paused, clearly reluctant to continue. "Mandatory schooling for all children. They want to send our young ones to the government schools back east." The thought made Celeste's blood run cold. She had heard horror stories about those schools. Children forbidden to speak their native languages, forced to cut their hair and wear white clothes, punished for practicing any aspect of their traditional culture. The schools claimed to be saving Indian children, but they were really trying to kill everything that made them who they were. "What will Iron Bull do?" "He will negotiate." Try to keep as much as possible of our traditional ways while giving enough to satisfy the government. Soaring Eagle's expression was grim. But the pressure grows stronger every year. They want us to become white men with red skin. Celeste felt the baby move in her womb, a flutter of life that reminded her of what was at stake. Her child would grow up in a world where being both white and crow might be seen as an advantage rather than a liability. But only if both cultures could find a way to coexist rather than destroy each other. Maybe that's where I can help, she said thoughtfully. I know both worlds now. I could speak to the government officials, explain that education doesn't have to mean cultural destruction. That children can learn to read and write without forgetting who they are. Soaring Eagle looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern that had become familiar over the past year. That would be dangerous work. Many white officials do not like to be challenged, especially by women. And many of them have never met a white woman who chose to become Indian, Celeste replied. I might be able to make them see things differently. It was ambitious, perhaps even naive, but Celeste had learned to trust her instincts. A year ago, her instinct had told her to trust Soaring Eagle when he offered her shelter. That decision had led to the happiest year of her life. As if reading her thoughts, Soaring Eagle reached over and placed his hand gently on her belly. Our child will be blessed to have you as a mother, he said softly. Someone who fights for what is right, even when it is difficult. Our child will be blessed to have both of us, Celeste replied, covering his hand with hers. And to grow up in a world where love matters more than the color of your skin. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that turned the stream into a ribbon of fire. Around them, the village was settling into its evening rhythm, smoke rising from cooking fires, children being called in for supper. The gentle lowing of cattle being driven to pasture for the night. Celeste had never imagined that peace could feel this solid, this permanent. Even with all the challenges that lay ahead, she felt rooted here in a way she had never experienced before. This was home, not just a place to survive, but a place to thrive. What are you thinking about? Soaring Eagle asked, noting her thoughtful expression. I was thinking, Celeste said, rising carefully from the stream bank, that a year ago I was dying in the snow, and now I'm planning to change the world. Life is strange sometimes. Not strange, Soaring Eagle said, rising with her and taking her hand. Miraculous. When two people choose love over fear, miracles become possible. As they walked back toward their lodge together, Celeste felt the truth of his words settling into her bones. They had chosen love for each other, love for their community, love for the child who would soon join them. And from that choice, a new world was being born, one relationship at a time. Behind them, the stream continued its ancient song, carrying their hopes and dreams toward a future that would be written by love rather than fear.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.